Hello and welcome to a special episode of Dairy Digressions, the new podcast of the American Dairy Science Association, the Journal of Dairy Science, and JDS Communications. I'm Matt Lucy, Editor-in-Chief of JDS Communications, and I'll be your host. I'm coming to you from the ADSA Discover Conference 45 on dairy cattle lifespan, taking place in Itasca, Illinois. ADSA Discover conferences bring together the top minds in the dairy industry. For these special episodes, I'll be sitting down with experts who are attending the meeting to get their thoughts on exciting new developments for dairy. If you enjoy Dairy Digressions or have any feedback for us, please let us know at adsa@adsa.org. And make sure to like, subscribe, and rate us on whatever platform you're listening on. And spread the word to a friend and colleague. Now, let's get to the meeting. Today, we have Donagh from Teagasc Moorpark, Senior Principal Research Officer and Quantitative Geneticist. Donagh, welcome.
Thanks, Matt.
It is fantastic to have Donagh here. He's an old friend. And I just want to remind everybody who we're dealing with. We are dealing with the father of the Economic Breeding Index in Ireland. Is that true?
I think it's probably a bit true, all right, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to talk about the EBI, and we're going to talk about, but that's what I think of you. When I think Donagh, I think like dairy genetics, father of the EPI. And but let's start with with where you came from. So kind of your series of positions you held. First of all, you are a UCD grad.
I am, University College Dublin in Ireland, yeah.
Yeah, and you have an MS from UCD.
No, UCC, Cork.
What?
Yeah, I went down south.
You went from UCD to UCC?
Yeah.
Okay, so UCC is University College Cork. I didn't know that. Are they famous for genetics and bioinformatics?
That's bioinformatics. They must be.
Must be.
They are now.
They are now. And then, what? No. You went okay, now I've been really working on the pronunciation. Wageningen. Blew it.
Yeah.
You went there for your PhD.
Yeah.
And
that was before my MSc, though.
Stop.
I do things backwards.
You did it backwards?
Yeah.
Now, I know for sure that where we met the first time was in New Zealand and in Hamilton, and we were over at John Roach's house and Jane. We were eating meat pie.
Meat pie, that's right, and you took the last slice.
And I took the last slice, and we were down there. And of course, John Roach, longtime friend of the Journal of Dairy Science and Dairy Science in general, management kind of guy, I think it's fair to say, editor for the Journal of Dairy Science. What were you? Okay, you were a young guy. I remember you were driving this ratty old car. Yeah. What were you doing?
It was a 1984 Honda Accord.
Okay, thank you very much for that. What were you doing down there? What was it? Was that part of your training, or what was that?
So I just finished my PhD, and I'd taken up a permanent position with Teagasc, which is still the semi-state body that I work for. So Teagasc is the Irish for instruction or training. Okay. And I took that position on condition that I could spend 1 year down in New Zealand working with Livestock Improvement Corporation, who are an AI organization, breeding organization, and Peter Raymer down in Dunedin.
So you were embedded in LIC then in New Zealand?
I was, yeah. So don't mention rugby.
So then after that, you started in your positions and sort of moved up your rank at Teagasc Moorpark.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Teagasc Moorpark. So gigantic research institution. We'll talk about Vista Milk in a second, but you're an Irish person. I know you grew up near Teagasc Moorpark. And what attracted you there initially? I mean, did you always want to go back to Ireland and work in Ireland, or what?
Yeah. Would you believe my parents actually met in Teagasc Moorpark?
No kidding.
And I met my wife in Teagasc Moorpark.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So Teagasc, as I said, is the Irish for instruction, and it's actually spread across the whole country. So we're involved in research, education of farmers, and extension, what you call the extension services, right? So at that time, we had Seamus Hanrahan, who's a sheep geneticist, and he was on the way for retiring. So what we did was we started to build our own quantitative genetics group in Moorpark. So Moorpark does the dairy and the pigs. And within Moorpark now we have a quantitative genetics group, which is dairy, PhD students, and some postdocs as well.
In your lab, then?
Well, we don't really have that kind of a hierarchy in Moorpark. It's in the quantitative genetics group.
In the quantitative genetics group. So it's a big group then?
Relatively big, yeah. But the big beauty in Ireland with Teagasc is our alliance with your equivalent of the CBBC, I think, is the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, which is a government body responsible for national genetic evaluations for dairy, beef, and sheep.
Oh, fantastic. So that's the ICBF is what people would say that.
ICBF, yeah. So it's maybe probably unique-ish globally in that all the dairy farmers' data is inside there. All the beef farmers' data from every beef farmer in the country is inside that central repository. We have access to that for research purposes. And what we do is we do a lot of the research, the quantitative genetic research. So we build the statistical models, etc. We publish the paper and then pass the systems to the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, who then run the evaluations.
So they sort of implement the new information into their system, and then that goes directly to the farmers to help them.
Directly to the farmer. But again, the beauty is it's seamless because we're in discussions constantly. So the pipelines that we have developed, well, firstly, what we work on is what they want, and vice versa. And there's that mutual relationship there. And then what we develop, they can seamlessly deploy because they've been involved since the conception of the program.
So we're going to turn back the clock a little bit. I know you're from the town of Ballyduff, which is a small town that's maybe, I don't know. I know it's down Highway 666. I believe that Ballyduff is on Highway 666. I don't want to say anything about that, but I know you had some suckler cattle there growing up, but then you end up in Derry. So how did that
No, not in Derry. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. But I still have the beef cows. I still have the sheep, a few horses and ponies. But the money's all in Derry, Matt.
The professionally you ended up in Derry. So at UCD, you're not at UCD, and so you're a kid, you're 18 years old, you're in Dublin for the first time, you're like, oh my gosh, and you're in class, and you go to a genetics class, and you decide you're going to become a dairy geneticist, or how does that evolution occur? Where in your life did you say, oh, this is interesting?
I always liked mathematics, actually.
All
the way through school, so I did a higher level maths all the way through school.
Then you started going to graduate school to get your sort of degrees.
Yes.
2 degrees.
Yes.
You came back to Moore Park, and I think you came back to Moore Park in
2003.
2003.
Yeah, no, my PhD was in 2000. Yeah, I came back in 2003.
And they're just finishing the human genome, I believe, at that point. Okay. And somewhere along the line, you learned about A, G, T, and C. And so I know that we were talking about earlier that you said that you guys introduced genomics into genetic evaluations 2009, 1 year after the Americans.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks after
3 weeks after the Americans.
Yeah.
So did you think it was going to go when that first came out? I asked this question because, people in America were very suspicious about genomics initiated. They wanted the traditional breeding values, not the genomic breeding values.
Yeah. So I was developing it for probably 6 to 12 months before that, writing all the programs. I was validating it. It was obvious it was working. You could argue it was a paradigm shift. I don't think it was, because the farmer saw exactly the same answers. Okay. All the genomics was doing was making better relationships. Okay. So do you have a brother or sister?
I do have 4 older brothers, and I do.
You know where I'm going with this. You've heard me tell this story.
I'm not sure where you're going with this. I have 4 older brothers.
Give me one of their names.
Andrew
also got half his genes from your father, yeah?
Yeah.
But it could have been the other half.
Ooh.
So actually, we did this recently. We published this in GSE this year, I think.
Yeah.
So on average, full sibs share half their genome.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we were all taught in high school. Yeah?
Yeah.
Sorry to tell you, that's wrong.
Oh, no. This is the problem. Okay,
this is the expectation. Okay. But there's actually a standard deviation of 0.04 units around that.
Okay.
So there is a lot of variability. We see the same in chickens. We did this in sheep, and we did this in cattle.
Yeah.
So all genomic selection is really doing is getting the relationships amongst animals more towards the actual as opposed to the expected. So it's not a big deal.
Well, but it's changed everything, right? It's changed. I don't know if it's changed everything in Ireland, but
it really changed everything. Really, farmers are still using breeding indexes. They're still hopefully using what do you call them? Predicted transmitting abilities as well. Is it?
Well, that's a beef thing in America.
Yeah, I don't know what you call them here, but they're still using the best bulls who are ranking higher on the NMI or whatever index. What has it changed?
Yeah. So what year was the Economic Breeding Index introduced?
Yep. So the EBI, the Economic Breeding Index, was introduced in 2001.
Okay.
It included 5 traits. It replaced the old RBI, which was milk yield, fat yield, protein yield, and protein percentage.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And the EBI had 5 traits: milk yield with a negative weight.
Okay. Fat
yield and protein yield, calving interval, and survival. Now, they were the 2 fertility traits. Why did we have those fertility traits? Was because at that time, BSE, remember BSE in 96?
Yes, yeah.
Right? it was a legal requirement to record the calving date or the birth date, of every calf and the mother, not the sire.
Okay.
It was optional to record the sire. But because you had the birth date of every calf and the dam, you then had the calving dates of every cow.
Ooh, which is a big deal.
So you had the calving interval.
Yeah.
When you didn't have the calving interval, you had the survival.
Right.
So if you want to have an index like the NMI, the traits that you put in there must fulfill 3 criteria, right? Must be important. And our index is called the economic breeding index, so they must be economically important. 2, they must demonstrate genetic variability.
Right.
Every single trait demonstrates genetic variability. You, as a fertility expert, will tell me, but it's only 3% of fertility is genetics.
Yeah.
And I say, that's 3% of what we can work with.
Yeah.
Didn't geneticists do a brilliant job in destroying it? Fertility.
Yeah, well, they did. They were good at it.
They were really good at it, and now we're really good at improving it, right? So that's the third thing. And then the second thing, and the third thing then is you must have data.
Yeah.
So we didn't have any insemination data. We didn't get that until 2005.
Okay.
Right. So we just had calving, interval, and survival at that time.
So I want to go back and just talk about a kind of a broader issue and your experience as an individual introducing a new concept. Okay. So I just want to, for our listeners who don't understand this, up until I thought it was till 1994, the only thing we would select is production. In your case, fat and protein, regardless of production. And then the EBI comes out and you're trying to convince farmers that they should be identifying bulls with a high EBI. And so tell me about the pushback, or was everybody, Donagh, you're the greatest thing since, Guinness or whatever. I don't know. What was it like those early days, the phone calls, the emails?
Yeah. Unbelievable pushback.
Pushback.
Oh, unbelievable. So what we were saying was these small, fattish cows that didn't produce a massive amount of milk actually were more profitable.
Yeah.
And interesting, and we might come back to this later. I'm going through the same process now in beef.
What?
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting to look back 20 years ago where the dairy farm was output.
Yeah.
And just, you could see the money, the checks coming in.
Yeah.
But he couldn't see the checks going out. Or if the cow was not in calf, what was that? That was a check. Because I sold the cull cow.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And now the beef farmer is going, same thing, output, carcass.
Right.
And if the cow is not in calf, that's more money because I sold the cull cow.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So brilliant, unbelievable feedback. Right. How do we get acceptance? Around 2000. So probably around 4 to 5 years to get acceptance. Right?
4 to 5 years.
4 to 5 years.
Of hard, nasty emails and guys standing up, yelling and screaming.
Well, there wasn't many emails back then. That was right in your face. It was hard grafting, right? So we have 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland, and honestly, we visited every 26 of those. Right.
With your message.
I went up to the north, which was probably around 5 hours drive back then, and there was 13 people at the meeting. I left it at midnight, coming back home again. But so how do we do it? One is we had a controlled study in Curtin's Farm in Moore Park.
Of course, yeah,
right,
I remember
where
that.
we had the high index and the low index.
Right.
So farmers could come and see that these animals actually had 4 legs, a tail, and a head.
Right. Yeah.
And then they could see the profitability figures, and they looked normal. Right. That was the first thing. Secondly, our extension service were fully behind us.
Good.
Right. And there was a few key people inside there, the likes of Matt Ryan, that were completely bought into it and that they drove it on because they were meeting the farmers. And then the third one was we had a EBI 100 competition, which was in Ireland, we have what are called discussion groups where farmers of a locality of a similar mindset, maybe 20 of them, come together every month. And breeding is obviously very topical in there. Yeah. So there was a competition for the discussion groups as to who could get to the highest EBI. And looking back, it was hard, but what we achieved was monumental. And there has certainly been some speed bumps. Right. Maintenance is becoming very topical. Maintenance cow size.
Okay, size. Right. They're too big or too little?
Well, this is it. Depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
So I did one discussion group and they were giving out, the EBI is making cows too small. The next day I was in the middle of the country. He's making cows too big. Right. So it's what's your preference?
Yeah.
Crossbreeding or not? That was very topical for
nasty stuff. Crossbreeding. Years
ugly. With the jerseys was in particular. And genomics is obviously very topical as well, because what we're seeing is before it was the genomic bull was the son of a proven bull.
Yeah.
And it was bias in there. Now we're seeing the genomic bull as the grandson of a genomic and a genomic and a
Right,
genomic.
right.
So we've got this cumulative bias coming into.
Yeah. We always say that, as you know now, most cows are bred to a sire who's never had a daughter in production.
Yeah.
And,
It's what keeps things exciting, isn't it?
Well, it keeps it very interesting. So the EBI came out. You finally get that kind of worked through. Are you still tweaking the EBI, or you kind of continue to tweak it?
Every year we'll sit down and we'll take a look at it, see does it need to be changed? Because remember, you're breeding for something that's 7 to 10 years down the line.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in November last year, we included the first in the world to include a carbon sub-index component of it. Carbon cost, right? So there's your methane. So here you're actually selecting for less milk, right? Because cow that produces more milk eats more. Cow on average who eats more produces more carbon. Yeah.
Hold it. Okay, keep telling me.
Okay, but I'll come back to that.
Okay, you come back to
and fertility and survival.
Okay,
Now, let's go back to the negatives on fat and protein.
Yeah.
So you have an economic component.
Yeah.
Right, which is you get an economic return for more protein, but then there's a negative cost associated with it. So when you add the two of them together within the total merit index, it's still favorable towards more fat and protein.
But less milk, obviously.
Well,
right?
we already had the negative on milk, because who wants to be carting around water?
So it's the economic breeding index. These guys aren't selling carbon, are they? They're not. They're selling milk. So where does the economic?
At the moment, breeding for something 7 to 10 years down the line, and there's probably a very good chance that farmers would either be penalised or incentivized.
So you're getting ahead of the curve on this.
Well, you have to, as geneticists, we have to, right? The quotas left Ireland, milk quotas left Ireland in 2015. We changed the index in 2007 for quotas to be gone. Okay. So we were 8 years ahead of the game. Yeah. Will we be right? Will we be wrong? If we're wrong, it's probably the right thing to do. So we assume that a value of 80 euros a ton. Don't ask me where we came up with 80 euros a ton. Yes. How we actually came up with it was if you went a greater carbon cost, the acceleration in EBI slowed down considerably, and same for carbon. So it was kind of a sweet spot. And I don't think it's
I think that's an excellent point that I hadn't really thought about, is that if you're going to be doing genetics in dairy, you better be forward looking, because you have to have your cows ready when the legislatures or whoever changes things. And that's an excellent point. I hadn't really thought about that. And certainly everybody in America is talking about carbon credits and figuring out how to capture the carbon market in America, And hey, I want to give a little shout out to the next generation herd, because that kind of came after that first experiment you did. Then came the next generation herd, where you actually had high EBI and average, national average EBI grazing together in the same herd, demonstrating the effectiveness of EBI. And I tell you, that herd was in play when I was there in 2013. I'm sure I looked at those cows in 2013. I'm not sure if they're still there, but are they still there?
Some of them are still there. We're actually just in the process of revamping that experiment, actually.
So this is an experiment I'm familiar with. Again, high EBI cows, national average EBI cows, and in the same herd, milking side by side, eating side by side. And you take a look at those cows and you just start to understand the potential of genetics and improving the quality of cattle. You get the capacity to have a high producing cow, an economically efficient cow, but also a cow that gets pregnant, a better body condition, all their hormonal, one thing that was been interesting from my perspective as a physiologist is a lot of the hormones and metabolites that we see sort of out of whack in some of these cows start to normalize when you actually have a more balanced. Does that make sense to you? Normalization of everything. Yeah,
like the beauty of that next generation herd, as the name suggests, it's the next generation. So it's 10 years in genetic gain ahead from the national average.
Right. Okay.
So what it's supposed to do is future-proof where we're going on our index.
Yeah.
But it was like Ireland is great in that it's so small. Right. So everywhere is probably maximum 5 hours from more parking. Right. So farmers could come and see those animals. Great resource for demonstration purposes. But then from a bioscience perspective, we had the likes of you was able to get in onto the hood and realize why are these animals looking at differences in gene expressions, etc.
I always tell people that, you have to understand that for years and years we selected for, I'll call it milk, but I know what you mean, pounds of fat and protein. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. And the biology went a certain direction, probably the most efficient direction possible if you only wanted to get a high production cow. Exactly. So the biology changed. Okay. But now we're just simply changing the biology back in a different direction. There's different biologies that can get milk out of a cow. Okay. You don't have to use let's lose a lot of body condition and not get pregnant biology. You can use the let's not lose a lot of biology. Does this make any sense whatsoever?
Yeah. So like this is again one of the arguments we would have had for the EBI. There's 3 ways to increase milk production in Ireland, right? One is genetic selection for milk production.
Right.
Like everybody knows.
Yeah.
The second is to lengthen our lactations.
You can't do that in Ireland.
You know that we all go to the pub on Christmas. So all the cows are dried off at Christmas.
Okay.
So if you have a February calving cow, you get your 305 days.
Yeah.
If you've got an April calving cow, you're still going to the pub. So you're going to dry her off on Christmas Day too, right? So lengthening our lactations is another way. And the third way, and I would argue the easiest way, is to get them to live for longer.
Yeah.
So a mature cow will yield 29% more than the first lactation.
Oh, here we go. Live longer.
Live longer, man.
Okay, so
neither not as it's more economical, but from a carbon perspective, you're diluting that cost over a longer lifetime. You know how long it takes a cow to repay her replacement costs? You know how long that takes?
I don't know.
1.63 lactations, Matt.
What?
Yeah. So if your cow does not enter the second half of her second lactation, she made a loss.
Okay. So we're gonna get there. Because that's the topic of this conference. But I want to ask you, Irish dairy industry, we already talked about the Irish dairy industry. You said you got 1.5 million cows in Ireland.
1.55 million growing.
Growing?
Yeah, it's been growing 3 to 5% for the past 10 years. Now, so we're going through some changes from an environmental perspective. You might have seen talk about it. It did reach some, I think, the European media about a cull. They wanted to cull 200,000 cows in Ireland purely from an environmental perspective.
What? How do you grow an industry?
Traditionally, a few years ago, we would have had maybe 1.3 million dairy cows and 1 million beef cows.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the actual numbers now, but we're around 1.5 million dairy cows and around 0.85 million beef cows. Okay. So beef is largely an unprofitable enterprise in Ireland.
Okay, I know.
And subsidies, the European subsidies are what keeps it going.
Okay.
Dairying is extremely profitable.
Still?
Oh, extremely profitable. But what we're seeing is a transition from beef farming to dairy farming.
Really?
Right? Also, a lot of the beef farmers are doing contract rearing of the heifers.
Yeah, for sure.
Which then enables the dairy farmer to have more cows on his milking platform.
Makes sense. Get them off the platform so we can do that. So you mentioned that the plan was to kill 200,000 cows.
Not the plan, but it was a floated idea as a means of reducing the environmental footprint of our herd. Mm-hmm. But what was actually implemented was, so there's nitrates in the water are obviously bad for you. Mm-hmm. We're depending on the report, it doesn't look like we're seeing any improvement in the waterways in Ireland from a nitrates perspective. So we had what's called a derogation. That enabled us to have a higher stocking rate than most of the European farms because of our pasture-based system. Okay, yeah. And that's been reduced. So we're going to have to reduce our stocking rate. So a number of farmers are going to have to keep less, either acquire more land, which is difficult to get,
in Ireland, right?
Or cut their herd. So
this is a real thing that. I mean, this concept that you're going to have to do something about your stocking rate.
Oh yeah. No. This is coming in. Yeah.
So the one thing about Ireland, I'm not sure everybody understands, is that it's very, and then maybe this is incorrect, but I've heard that it's very difficult to acquire land in Ireland. These are family farms that held for a long time. It's not like you can your neighbor's going to throw up a for sale sign and sell his family farm. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. What I heard, the statistic I have from university is 85% of land in Ireland is owned.
It's owned.
So I own my own land, and there's no way I'm selling it.
Right. They will not sell it. What are farmers talking about right now? Like if I was to go to a conference.
Environment.
Really?
Yeah, it's all environment. And it's not so much methane or carbon. It's at the moment it's nitrates. Well, at the moment it's probably.
What is it? So that's the stuff in the urine that gets into the water supply.
And the nitrogen fertilizer is a big one. So like this is unbelievable, Matt.
The nitrogen in the fertilizer.
Yeah, in calcium, ammonium nitrate or urea to make the grass grow.
I didn't know you guys are so you do use a certain amount of fertilizer.
We use a lot. We use a lot. Well, it's really expensive this year, right?
Right. Yeah.
So if you stand back, right, and look at farming and their ability to adopt innovation. So clover, as you know, takes the nitrogen out of the air and fixes it and releases it to the plants. When I started in Moore Park 20 years ago, clover was a weed.
What?
Yeah, clover was a weed.
Oh, no.
Now we're seeing land being reseeded with massive amounts of clover.
Yeah.
These multi-species swards, so herbs like chicory, plantain that have these deep tap roots that can stop the nitrogen going down. We're seeing a real shift in not just dairy farming, in agriculture in general, and you asked me, going back to the original question, what people are talking about environment, and trying to put in place the tools that enable us to reduce our environmental footprint.
I remember that Moorpark did a lot of work on clover down south. I remember it was down south, big trial down there. It was pretty
really
promising data from clover.
Yeah, that was white clover. Now we're seeing a bit of more inclusion of red clover, and not necessarily for grazing, but more for cutting for silage.
Do you think Irish, now that we're talking about production, I want to ask you about consumers. Does the average Irish person still support the dairy industry in their mind, or does that depend if you're from Dublin or from Cork or... Where's their head at? Okay.
I'd say support is reducing, to be honest.
Why?
Yeah, just the media, social media, newspapers, televisions are full. I believe, maybe I just have this in my head of anti-farming sentiment, but especially when it comes to environment.
Yeah.
Like, so agriculture contributes around 38% of the greenhouse gases in Ireland.
Okay.
Right? That's a lot. Yeah. A lot of it is because of the fact that we don't really have other industries.
Right.
Yeah. But that's been bandied around the whole time. Nitrates in the water has been banned. And like, hands up, agriculture is contributing. That's actual.
Right.
A lot of that is fact, right?
Yes.
But it's to create the tools to enable farmers to reduce that. And we've seen time and time again.
Yes.
Once the tool is available and there is a return on investment, farmers rapidly adopt it. Genomics is a great example.
Well, they do, right.
Within a few months of releasing genomic evaluations, 34% of the semen sold that year was to genomics.
Right.
We have low emission slurry spreading, whereby, the animals are indoors for the winter, the slurry is stored, that is spread out. Before we used to throw it up into the air.
Yeah, remember those days?
The splash base, all up.
Right.
Science told us that wasn't either economically justifiable or environmentally. So now we kind of almost inject it into the soil. Farmers are all using that technology.
Kind of like knifing it in instead of throwing it up in the air. It's kind of interesting.
But like you can't bash a sector or a person unless you provide a tool or an alternative.
Right.
And the science changes.
Right.
So previously that was fine, throwing it up into the air. Now once the science is known, change the practice.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about working in the dairy industry, and you'd agree with it, is that, you're working with people that are willing to change and adopt new technology.
But you have to change.
You have to change.
You have to change.
Yeah.
Right? It's a business.
Right. You have to. And we see that in America. These guys are really cutting edge in terms of what they do. And what I think they even surprise us. We were talking about the sex semen and, in America now to the point where, sex semen goes into any cow you want a calf out of for a female, any cow you want to stay in your herd, any progeny you want to stay in your herd, you're going to breed Holstein sex semen to those, and everything else is beef. And you said that the sex semen has also really started to really pick up in Ireland, because remember, it wasn't more than a couple of years ago, maybe, they were saying, well, it'll never work with the cows because we can't get high enough fertility. But after a while, they're just...
Yeah, but like fertility is so important to us, Matt. Any drop in conception rate, which we know is there.
Yeah.
Now the extent of it, I think, has reduced.
Yeah, gotten a lot better.
But we can't compromise fertility in a seasonal calving system like we have in Ireland.
Right.
But where you touched on it there, where I think the growth is going to be the beef on dairy.
Yeah, yes.
Because sex semen is it's still the same old genetic gain in the black and white.
Yeah.
There's nothing changing there.
Yeah.
Where I think we're losing is the genetic gain in the beef on the dairy.
Right. Because I know you work on, I saw you just had a paper in Journal of Dairy Science on that, sort of the beef on dairy. It was too much math. Can you geneticists just do you have to put all those equations in there? I just see the equations. I go to the conclusions. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it had a bunch of equations in there.
Yeah. I do my best to keep the numbers less than 5 so you can count them.
This isn't true. So I know you're interested in that beef on dairy turn across.
The potential is unbelievable, beef on dairy, right? And I'll tell you why, right? If we look at dairy, right, it's only expressed in females. So half your population is gone.
Yeah, right.
Beef on dairy, it's expressed in every animal.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
A lot of your dairy index is probably called lowly heritable, the traits, which means you need lots of data.
Right.
All the beef on dairy traits are all highly heritable. You don't need much data.
Okay.
And you have it on twice the number of animals.
You can move it faster.
Yeah. Takes you 3 years to get a calving interval survival phenotype on dairy. It takes you 15 months to get it on beef.
Right.
There is, we know how fast we've gone on dairy breeding.
Yeah.
I would argue if the mindset and the willingness is there, we could probably go 3 times faster in beef.
It's interesting. The beef on dairy just took the American dairy industry by storm in a good way. And I'm sure you're aware, I think the numbers are 13 to 15% of U.S. beef is now beef on dairy crosses. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but the United States beef herd is shrinking. And the beef on dairy market is just filling it in. The calves are very valuable right now. I'm not sure what's going on in Ireland, but I just got an email from my good friend Joe Meyer in Unity, Wisconsin, and Badger Holsteins. He averaged $545 for week-old beef on dairy calves.
Well, what's the breed there?
Angus dairy. And of course, I don't know what's going on in Europe, but the beef market has gone crazy here. And
we've been doing beef on dairy for decades.
Yeah.
Because most of our dairy farms, because of this tradition of handing the land down.
Right.
And then if you have 4 brothers, so that was broken into 4. So what happened was the land was all fragmented.
Right.
So what you had is you had the dairy milking platform, and then you had the beef in the other part, which was a few kilometers or miles away, as you would say.
So we're at the DC 45, and it's 2 or 3 days on sort of longevity. And longevity is this concept of how long do you want your cows to stay in a herd. And I was a dummy, and I thought to myself, well, the best thing would be low replacement rates, long-lived cows, and to me that made some sort of economic sense. But then there's a whole lot of other people who say, no, I want the best cow in that stall, regardless of replacement rate. I want to put the best cow in that stall. And from an Irish perspective, you mentioned to me that you are increasing longevity at a tenth of a year every 2 years. I don't know how I'm going to say it. What is it? Give me the numbers.
0.05. So what's that? 20th of a lactation every year. So a tenth of a lactation every 2 years. Yeah.
That's pretty fast genetic progress.
Well, back between 1990 and 2000, we lost 0.1 lactation per year. So over that 10-year period, we lost a whole lactation per cow. That is devastating.
So ultimately what this means is cows that stay in the herd longer, you'll have a little bit older herd structure and a reduced replacement rate.
Correct. So you tell me, you're the expert. What's the optimal replacement rate?
Well, it goes all over the place, but we got dairies that'll tell you 40% is ideal. And that, to me, that seems pretty high. I'm not an economist, but it seemed like if you had a low replacement rate, you would carry fewer heifers, and there's an environment, there's a cost. You got to raise those guys, but then other people tell me, no, it's not like that.
Well, if Dick Esselmon's, you were probably at that in the Galway Conference 99. He said around 18%. I think that's the number people use.
18 is what?
18% replacement rate
is what?
That's your ideal, your optimal.
Well, not everybody agrees with that. Let's say that
let's do it. I know you're not good at mathematics, but 1 divided by 0.18 is what?
I don't know. Stop it.
It's around 5.5 lactations.
Really?
Yeah. So this is where I get my 5.5 lactations from. So our goal, Moore Park Open Day, you were probably there. The name of my board was achieving 5.5 lactations per cow. Now,
what's a half lactation?
So what I say to the farmers is go home. Because they look at the average age of the herd. No, you can't do that. In an expanding herd, your average age of your herd will be low, right? But you look at the cows that you've culled over the last few years, how many lactations did they achieve? They should be achieving 5.5 lactations. Well, now, I get some geneticists or whatever say, no, that's going to slow down your rate of genetic progress.
Right.
Okay. If I have 5.5 lactations per cow, I only need 18% replacements rate.
Right.
Yeah, because my cows are living long.
Okay.
Right. So you tell me maybe I need 25% heifers. Is it?
Okay. So, fair enough. You'll lose a few.
So, and I have 18% of my herd are heifers.
Yeah.
With sex semen, I can generate sufficient heifers for next year off of just my maidens and a few first lactation animals. If I didn't have cows that live for longer, I would have a higher replacement rate, which would mean I need to generate the next generation of heifers from my older cows, who you tell me is genetically inferior. Do the maths.
Yeah, do the maths.
Right? And forget about the fact that it costs us €1,540 to get a 24-month in-calf heifer in station. You want to dilute that across as many lactations. And from a carbon perspective, that 2-year-old has been burping and pooping and urinating for the last 2 years and giving you nothing in return.
I think this is, so for our audience, I'm going to just restate this for the people that don't think as fast as you, okay, like me. What Donagh is saying is that your highest genetic merit animals in your herd are your breeding heifers, right? And your first lactation animals, because they are the highest genetic merit. So you're going to generate your next generation from those animals, and you're going to keep your older cows, but you're not going to breed to make replacements out of that
Correct.
cow unless you've genomically tested her and you know she's superior.
Yep.
And you might breed all your older cows to beef, for example.
Correct.
But you're going to capitalize on those younger animals because they generally hold the better genetics.
Exactly.
And so that makes perfect sense. And you can only do that with a low replacement rate.
Exactly.
As soon as you have a 40% replacement rate, you're breeding everything of all ages, and you're just going to run out of good genetic cows to create the next generation.
Exactly.
Did I say it right?
You did, but what you're forgetting is the system. So beef on dairy. You want a good big beef calf, yeah?
Right.
So who's going to give you that? The little heifer or the old mature cow?
The old mature cow.
Yeah. So you've got that remaining part of your herd can now take a good beefy bull.
Yeah.
And can take that little bit of extra calf
Yeah.
difficulty that's associated with it.
Yeah.
The generator's really good.
I think this is a great conversation because I think it applies to both the Irish farmer, but I think there'll be some American farmers that are going to listen to this and go, that seems to make a little sense to me, you know. And I haven't heard that argument.
But you see, Matt, genomics and sexema has just turned this on its head. Right. Because that heifer, you would have said to me, oh, she's poor reliability. I want to prove on that. Yeah. No, her accuracy or her reliability is as high now as your 5, 6, 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And then the sexing technologies enables you to do, you don't need as many females bred.
I think that's a great argument, you know, and that just makes a tremendous amount of sense for me. Because on average, your heifers are going to be the best genetically. They got to be if you're doing your breeding, right? They've got to
they're genomically tested.
And heifers, and then you get all of them from there. You're breeding heifers to sex semen, so you're getting heifers or having heifers, and there's just all sorts of stuff that's really nice about that. So SFI. So we're going to talk about Vista Milk, and Science Foundation Ireland is one of the major funding agencies in Ireland. They fund everything from medical research, agricultural research, and somehow you guys scored a major grant. You know, it's not for curing cancer; it's for improving the dairy industry in Ireland. I think that was quite a coup. I think. Yeah,
it's one of the 16 centres, SFI centres. Yeah,
and in Ireland.
Yep.
And it's called Vista Milk. And I'm sure you have a whole thing you want to talk about. But as I was looking at this, it's the research program for Vista Milk is soil and pasture, cow and food. So soil and pasture. This is research. So what are you trying to do under the soil and pasture thing?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it. One is what we would call basic or more fundamental research, which is your long-term stuff, and then there's your applied research. So if we look at the two of them, we hear a lot about, in Europe anyway, about this capturing of carbon. So this sequestration of carbon. I'm not sure, do you hear about that?
We got to capture some carbon. We got to grow some trees.
Yeah, how much carbon is your soil sequestering?
Well, it depends what you do. Obviously, if you
give me a number.
I don't know.
Yeah, but this is the problem. But this is the problem, Matt. We don't know.
Well, you got to do no-till. You got to get that. You got to get that carbon into the soil, and it's got to stay there.
We have to measure it. So one of our missions in Vista Milk is to actually provide the facts. So we have a board, and I went to the board one day and I said, "Should we get out into the social media and start telling?" They said, "No. There's enough entities doing that. You provide the science to back up the data."
Okay.
Right. And one of the things we're looking at, we'll come back to this in a second when it comes to methane, right? Yeah. Is how much methane do your cows produce?
They barely any, as far as I can tell. We're American cows. We're methane less.
Would you believe that 38% of greenhouse gases that agriculture contributes, we didn't know how much methane our cows produce. And when we measured it in Vista Milk, we realized in early lactation, they were producing around 15% less than what the models were saying.
That's interesting. I'm not sure why they make less methane in early lactation, but
Pastor, you know our seasonal system. So my new feed additive is good quality spring grass.
It reduces methane production?
It's got less methane than what the models think, the inventory models think. Now, in the later lactations, they're around the same. Mm-hmm. Okay. So go back to the soil and the pasture. So one of the things is looking at the soil microbiome, the sequestration of the soil. One of the cool things in pasture, right? You know how important pasture is in Ireland.
For sure.
Okay. So good Irish farmers, beef, dairy, sheep, doesn't make a difference. They will walk the land every week and eyeball how much grass is in that field.
Of course,
right?
Pasture walks.
Pasture walks. Right?
I can't do those. It's too much walking. Give me a motorbike. All right.
Right. So what we built is a digital technology with only a 4% error that will look at the species within the pasture and also measure quantity of feed that's available, because that's crucial, because the cows are coming into that field and you want to know, well, how much grass is in the field? Is it sufficient to feed those particular cows? how do I see this being rolled out is so it was built on using cameras, but also with iPhones. And the accuracy was very, very similar. So now we're moving that towards using drones. Okay.
Like the drones that fly in the air.
Drones fly in the air with cameras. Now, you and me, okay, so a lot of Vista Milk has a huge amount of expertise in AI and machine learning and statistical analysis, right? If I was to build a model to measure pasture from drones, I would fly the drone over a few fields and I'd measure how much grass is in it, right? But what these smart guys did is they had already built the models to predict the grass from the iPhone. What they did is they translated the image from the drone to be equivalent image of the iPhone and then use the models from that. So when it's windy and the drone can't fly, you just use your phone. Same model.
Yeah, fantastic, right? So these guys are good. So the new way to sort of assess pasture growth.
Exactly, right? Right. Moving on to the animal, then the methane was a really
the cow. We're talking about the cow. So this is this next. No,
sorry, the parts. Yeah, so we work all the way from soil to sewers, right? So the cow was the next one then, and we bought some green feeds.
I can make a joke right now, but I won't. Okay, so carry on. South to sewer, cows to sewers,
soil to sewers,
soils to sewers. Okay,
but if I'm among dignitaries, I'd say soil to society.
Oh, nice. I like that one. But okay, so we got cows. You got a Vista Milk on cows.
So the methane is the big one there, looking at the feed additives. Our issue with the feed additives, of course, is because they're pasture-based. It's to be able to feed them something that will last for a long time. So we have used some feed additives where we see a drop, 46% drop in methane, because when the cows come in to be milked, they're fed concentrates before they go back out. So a 46% drop, but within 118 minutes, it was back up.
Right, it doesn't it doesn't stay in the room.
It doesn't stay in the room. So now, from a pasture-based situation, we need to develop a technology which was sustained release device or something like that. To be released.
I know that you're also as a geneticist, and we're not going to be able to touch on this paper by Sinead McParlin, who's your better half, who's a good friend of mine and my wife. Okay, and she just published a paper in Journal of Dairy Science, kind of working through the predicted methane from mere spectra, milk spectra, but measure the milk spectra, but also validate that, I guess it's fair enough, with actual measurements of methane released by the cow. And I thought that was interesting that, the last bit here, you commented that there is genetic variation in methane phenotype for a cow, right? That's fair. So different cows produce different amounts of methane, but I thought the second part was excellent. Whether or not selection for methane, reduced methane, will lead to a reduced methane phenotype is what needs to be tested. In other words, okay, fine, we know this variation. Can we then develop, I guess, genetic evaluations for methane? And does that really move the needle? Is that what you're trying to say?
So if you select on methane per day, right, you're going to probably take selection pressure off the other traits in the index.
Yeah, right? Yeah, you are.
So
there's only 100%. I don't care what you say. 100% is 100%. Right? So something's coming out.
Exactly. And if improving survival or fertility reduces your carbon footprint, and you're going to slow down the rate of that improvement, what's better off? Selecting for methane per day and slowing down total carbon, or forgetting about methane today and driving on with carbon? And we don't know the answer.
So you need to work on that.
We need to do the mathematics to work out, and that's what the paper is about, is what's the extent of that genetic variability in methane? How heritable is it? In other words, how many records do we need to get accurate genetic evaluations? And what's the correlation with fertility and survival? If they're in a bad direction, that means if you put it into the index, you'll slow down the rate of gain.
Right.
But actually, even if they're in a good direction, you're still going to take selection off. So you need to do the mathematics. And it's not about just methane. Like, we have a paper coming out on nitrogen use efficiency. I think nitrogen use efficiency and nitrates is probably more urgent than methane, but everybody's talking about methane.
Right. But the nitrogen is, you talked about the fact that the nitrogen is a big deal right now with you.
It is from a fertilizer, but also from the cow. Like the cow, confinement or outdoors, they excrete 75% of the nitrogen that they ingest. That's unbelievably inefficient, right? Yeah. You use milk urea nitrogen as a proxy for it. It doesn't work for us.
Yeah. Right.
So again, go back to my three things. If you want to select something for something, is it important? Yes. Is it genetic variability? You just have to take my word, Matt, that everything has genetic variability.
Yeah.
And then the third one for methane and nitrogen use efficiency, can we measure it?
Yeah.
Or is it correlated with a measure?
Yeah.
And that was the whole rationale for looking at this infrared spectroscopy of the milk. But a lot of what happens inside of you comes out. You know that if you have a pint of Guinness tonight, right? It's going to come out again, right? It's the same in a cow. The stomach is producing the meat, and a lot of what's happening inside there is going to come out in the milk. Right. So can we use that to predict the meat?
I think it's an excellent point that, when you have these complex genetic selection indices like the EBI, and you want to introduce a new trait, you have to understand what's the relationship between that trait and all your other traits. Just as you point out. And if you don't know that, then you don't know where you're going. You're right. You can't even get the weighting right if you don't do that.
But a good example now is I'm coming under. You asked me about the friction when we introduced EBI, and I said we've had speed bumps. One we're going through at the moment is beef, right? So we know there's an unfavorable relationship between milk yield and beef, right? And we're actually reducing the conformation of our progeny. Right, the surplus male progeny and dairy and beef progeny in our index. People are saying, you have to stop that. You must stop that. I said, well, milk is worth more than beef.
Right.
So if I up the emphasis on beef to stop it declining, I'm going to slow down the rate of progress in milk, and farmers aren't going to be making as much money.
Right.
So you can't just because, it's a nice thing to include carbon, or it's a nice thing to stop the beef deteriorating. It's an economic breeding index at the end of the day, and money talks.
Yeah, money talks, right? And you can't have the only dog in this fight you got is the economics of it, right? Well, that's the only dog in the fight
Matt,
you got.
It's crucial that everything we do, we can stand up in the court of law and defend.
Right,
because there's mathematics behind every single piece of that.
Yeah, and your math really comes through, and particularly when you write your papers, then I just turn the page and go to I go to the next paper. Okay, but I go to my children's book or something. But before we're going to close pretty quick here, Donagh. But there's a comment here. I thought your research program also involves food, and you mentioned here in your synopsis, develop higher value-added dairy products for human consumption. And that's an interesting comment, like I don't know what's going on in Ireland, but in America, dairy consumption continues to go up, but our population continues to increase. The only, fluid milk consumption goes down, but whole milk consumption is actually increasing because people want that butter. It goes up, the metrics, but new dairy products. So are you interested in new dairy products? Or are you just what is that new dairy product?
So one of the things that, in Vistamith that we established with John Nolan in one of the universities is carotenoids. I don't know. Do you know much about
carotenoids?
What do you call them in here?
Carotenoids.
Right.
Well, but anyways,
So John has driven this program with Alfonso on carotenoids in the milk as a tool for fighting Alzheimer's. And
nice.
Yeah, it looks really, really positive stuff.
Nice.
So again, if we look at our breeding indexes, sorry to go back to the breeding, but if there's three things that are missing, I think one of them is product quality. More granular measures of product quality.
Right.
You think about a Matt, right? You've got kids you've got two cartons of milk in front of you.
Yeah.
One is just normal milk, and one has got Albert Einstein in the front of it and it's high in omega-3s. Which one are you going to buy?
Well, the Albert Einstein, I don't really know. I mean, I just buy normal milk, so don't ask me. Okay.
So I think we're now hopefully moving into phase 2 of Vista Milk.
Fantastic.
Where we're more about complementarity with the non-dairy alternatives. So
complementarity, isn't that joining the other side? Isn't that like training with the All Blacks? I mean, what the hell?
If you can't beat them, join them. But I think things have become so black and white, and I think there is an acknowledgement, right, that the non-dairy alternatives are deficient in things.
For sure.
Yeah. So I think this is an opportunity to possibly embrace those because they're coming.
Yeah.
Right. But identify complementary dairy or animal-based products to go alongside
complement them. Like if you're going to drink your almond milk, throw some regular milk in.
Put it as part of the diet. If you're going to be deficient in certain amino acids, here's a dairy product that can actually complement that.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, we're really there's a battle going on in America, as you know now. The government just refuses to enforce the laws which say that you cannot call that milk. I mean, you can't call almond stuff that's white milk, but we know that those beverages, they're not the same as milk. I'm going to ask you a few final questions. Who inspired your career? Somebody that you really met that really gave you some inspiration and drive to move forward in this genetics area?
I think it was my supervisor, Pat Dillon, who you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Pat Dillon, who long time, I don't know what his title was at Moore Park, but shout out to Pat Dillon, tremendous guy. I mean, I remember when I was there, it was just an inspiration to work with him. And I think he's moved up a little bit in the food chain there. Yeah. Tremendous guy.
Yeah. And most of the researchers, well, of the older researchers, I'm going to include myself in the older researchers, actually are descendants of Pat.
Did he give you some, you said, I have a question here, any real good science career advice that you got and you like to give to somebody else? Like, you're a scientist, you've been very successful. I mean, I'm sure Pat gave you some advice, but is there anything, if you were to talk to a kid, he's 22 years old, he's UCD, he's thinking about going into science, you got anything you would tell him?
I think the old cliche does no me in team, even though there is an M-E and an E.
Yeah.
So one of Pat's greatest qualities was, and probably Seamus Crosby for him, was team spirit and culture.
Yeah.
So I've really dropped the ball on this. Pat used to just come into your office, just sit down and talk.
Right.
And then that's where you get on. And you were the same when you were in Moore Park.
Right.
Like, so you can be all this excellent scientist, but if you're working by yourself because nobody will work with you,
you're
not going to deliver much.
Right. So true. Like if you look at what you guys been able to do with the genetics of Irish dairy cattle, it was a collaboration between a lot of people. I mean, that basically got on well. Exactly. If no one likes anybody, it's not going to happen.
And a clear vision. You have to have that clear vision of where you need to get to.
And you got to be tough, right?
You
got to be tough. So did you ever think about not being a scientist? Was there a day that you wanted to do something else? And what would have that something else been? Like, so for example, did you ever think, I think I might do this. Farming. I believe that, right? I believe that.
Yeah. And traveling. I really enjoyed backpacking. Yeah,
that's right. I forgot about that. You're and Sinead's quite a backpacker.
Yeah,
as
we
well.
backpack the world. Yeah.
Donagh, I knew it would be a great interview and I knew it would be good. I knew it would be interesting. I knew it would be exciting, and I knew we would cover a lot of ground. So we're going to have to do this again. But for now, I just wanted to say I appreciate you so much sitting down with us and having this podcast, because it's really been good. So I'm here with Donagh Barry from Moore Park, geneticist, and this has been Dairy Digressions. And thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.